Hi, I'm Jim Dittmar, and the best advice I ever received was to live my life as a servant leader.
Ooh, I love that advice. And I've enjoyed your books here, Jim. Thanks for sending them. I got the Leadership Carol as well as the Leader's Model. So we're going to talk about those. But before we do,
Great.
servant leadership. So, where did you learn that? Who shared that with you? How long ago was it?
Well, I'll tell you what, I learned it from my parents. And as a youngster, witnessing how they, uh, interacted with people. My father was a minister. My mother was very active in that role as well. And when I didn't appreciate it certainly as a kid as much as perhaps I should have, but I certainly witnessed a lot and observed a lot about how they treated people, how they interacted with folks, how they really tried to be of service to them. Uh, that it was about those folks and not about them. And later in life, when I was involved in leadership studies and developing the graduate program that I was involved in organizational leadership, and was introduced to this phrase servant leadership, many years ago, I said, that's what my parents were. They were servant leaders, and they basically, in their actions, said, live your life this way. And so for me, that had a huge impact. And I was once on a talk show, a radio talk show, where we were talking about servant leadership in the Pittsburgh area. And somebody called in and said, well, I want to share with you what someone who I think is a servant leader. I wasn't sure, obviously who was there and what they were going to say. And this person said, well, and he said, my father. And I thought, well, you know, that's, I didn't expect that, but we talked about it, and I said, yeah, you're right. You're right. I said, but you didn't have to live with them, though. That was,
That's really cool, right? That validation
yeah,
that that kind of you were right is really interesting. I mean, often, we know it, and maybe that's how people are to us, but it isn't always outwardly exhibited. So that's pretty cool, man, that you got that, that you had that. So who, obviously your parents, you studied that. Did you study other servant leadership? I mean, is that kind of been the crux of your study, or what? Talk to me about that.
well, it certainly has been an underlying theme that has run through the work that I've done, and in leadership development. As I mentioned, I was fortunate enough to be involved in the founding. Thank you. I need a little drink too. In the founding and directing of a Master's of Science in Organizational Leadership at a local college, and it was um, it was an opportunity to create something that had never really been done before. This was back in the mid early '90s, and there weren't any programs like this out there. It was really something that just there were no models, and so we created a program and a curriculum based on a lot of interviews that we did with folks from the area, CEOs, directors of training and development, employees, you name it, from all different kinds of organizations. And as we began to look through that data, we saw these themes emerge that eventually became the basis for our curriculum. And one of the things that we were committed to as well is this idea of let's make sure that servant leadership is kind of the theme that runs through this. And so, you look to people like Robert Greenleaf, who is often uh, referenced as the founder, as the father, if you will, of that phrase and of that thinking. And the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership and Larry Spears and his work that was being done there at the time provided a lot of good material for us in that graduate program. And then we just integrated that throughout the curriculum. So that was very important. My dear friend Frances Hesselbein, who continues to live her life at 105 or 6 as a servant leader in New York City, founder of the Drucker Institute, now called the Hesselbein Forum, and she's written a lot. She was an exemplar of servant leadership. And to her, the phrase was to live is to serve. And so just a wonderful person. People like Ken Blanchard, who I also had the privilege of interacting with, and can call him a friend as well. He befriended me, and his his record of not only as an author but as a practitioner of servant leadership. So you've got a lot more today than
Yeah.
you did 25, 35 years ago about this topic, and we continue to believe that it is the key uh, model, if you want. I hate to call it a model because it's more of a lifestyle of living, where you put your ego aside and say, it's not about me, it's about them, and that's not an easy thing to do all the time.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I've read, Dr. Blanchard's work. I'm not as fortunate as you are to call him a friend, but we've had a couple conversations. I certainly enjoy his work, and Frances Hesselbein, of course, right? You'd be remiss if you didn't mention her and Greenleaf. So that's cool, man. But what I find
yeah.
interesting about your work is that you guys started with a fable. That's really
Mhm.
interesting to me because that's unusual, for at least in my experience. I've read a lot of books. So tell me about how did you guys come up with this idea of a leadership fable to really help set the stage for your leadership.
Well, John Stanko, who is the co-author of that book, he and I worked together in this program for a number of years. He was one of our faculty and just did a tremendous job. And so, and he and I, just on various occasions said, "Man, we need to collaborate on a project here." John had written a number of books and been involved in all kinds of different activities related to leadership development. So, quite frankly, we were at a place in the area where we were talking about this and trying to think about how we could do it. It was shortly after Christmas, and we can't even remember exactly how it came up, as often is the case. But we had this idea: what about the Christmas Carol? Could we make that somehow translate into a text for today's leaders? Boom. And from that we said, okay, and we started, on the whiteboard, literally in this room, putting out these ideas of how we could take that structure of that story, that Dickens classic, and make it kind of come alive today with some fun little adjustments and changes. So instead of the ghost of Christmas past and present and future, we ended up with three consultants who visited our our Scrooge character, leadership past, present, and future, because the story is about Ben, our Scrooge character, who is not doing a very good job in leading a company that he inherited. It was a family-run business, and he got away from the principles of servant leadership and effective leadership that made that company do a great job and was very successful. And he was driving it down. He was driving it down, and so it's in that context that this story emerges. And we had fun with it, literary license, as they say, and and then as a means of really providing the structure, if you will, for the story, in terms of Ben, our character's leadership, we developed the leader's model, and the leader's model then became the basis for evaluating him and discussing what he was doing. And of course, in the process of that, we were able to talk about our leader's model. And it was that leader's model then that we said later on, we need to really dig down deeper into that leader's model. Let's talk more about that in a second book. And that book that we published recently is The Leader's Model, in which we take a deeper dive into those uh, letters, L standing for D for decision making, the second E for engagement, R for resilience, and S stewardship. And people may wonder, where the heck did that come from? Where did you come up with that leader's model? And once again, we go back to the tremendous experience we had, not only in our own experience as leaders, but in that experience of teaching leadership for those many years and seeing what was important. The subtitle, Essential Practices for Today's Leaders. It's not about everything that's been written about leadership, but it's the distillation of the essential ingredients we think are necessary for successful leadership that came from our experience in that graduate program and the more than 1,000 students who graduated from it. And that's what we where we gleaned. We learned so much about leadership development during that experience.
Excellent. So let's go through those and let's dig into a couple of those. Obviously, we're not going to have time to hit all of them. So, leaders model is leadership, ethics, alignment, decision making, engagement, resilience, and stewardship. Super understandable, super easy to remember. But I thought it was interesting, and you actually cover this in the book, which I appreciate. Because my first question was like, okay, leaders model L starts with leadership. Yeah, okay, right? I mean, that's kind of a bunny, right? I mean, that's like okay, the E stand for eaters. I mean, so tell me, how is that really the kind of foundational in the leaders model?
Yes, it's a point that John has made it on a few occasions, and even when we were developing it, we really want it to be leaders, the leadership, the first one. It's a leader's model, and so some may say, well, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? Obvious that leaders, but it is. It's the foundation for the rest of the model. It really is, because our belief is that leadership is an influence relationship that's developed among leaders and coworkers and other leaders, et cetera, through relationships. It's through positive relationships that you influence people, not through coercion or manipulation or any of those other means. And it's always in pursuit of achieving forward movement, whether that is mission oriented, vision oriented, whether it's the next project that has to be done, whether it's a new strategic plan that's got to be implemented. Uh, Leadership is about moving forward into that process. And so I always see leadership as being transformational. There's the model of transformational leadership, of course, by that Bernard Bass developed, and so forth. Many know about that. But when I say transforming leadership, I'm not just referring to that, but the transforming process that occurs when you move forward. When that organization or that group of people accomplishes something, that's the sign that leadership has been taking place. So that's why leadership is first. It's fundamental to everything that follows.
Absolutely. Yeah, that made so much sense when I read that. And I appreciate you explaining that more. Super, super important, right? We have to have a good foundation to
Yes.
build up. And with that, I think I might argue that alignment is probably the next kind of foundational piece. I know ethics is important, but
Hmm.
I'm going to hope that, that if people are listening to this, that they have some ethics, that they understand what the heck that is. But let's talk about alignment, Jim,
Sure.
because I think that one often is missed, right?
Yes.
We talk about a lot of them, but alignment is critical. So, talk to me a little bit about alignment and why that matters and what that really means to in your model.
Sure. Alignment is that notion that people working in an organization and the work that they produce, the work that they are committed to, is aligned with or contributes to the vision mission of that organization. That does so much for the individual and for the organization. You are right to say alignment is critical because we have so many organizations where there is misalignment, where people don't really understand, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of me being in this organization? Where do I see my work actually making a difference, not only in the organization, but out and beyond the organization? What about for me as an individual, as a professional? Where am I getting my meaning from the work that I'm doing? And so alignment helps create that. It enables individuals across the spectrum within organizations to really understand that my work is contributing directly to X, Y, and Z of this organization. And this is where leaders are so critical because leaders have to encourage that. They have to support that process of seeing alignment. They have to remind people and remind the folks that they're working with that this is what their work is doing. That the leader says, I really appreciate the job you're doing here because it is allowing us to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And there's other aspects that come into play in terms of allowing creating meaning in the workplace by giving teams and individuals some autonomy, some ability to make choice within their work that they do. That is choice in terms of how am I going to get this accomplished, choice in what really motivates me, what do I like to do, and the leader needs to find out what it is that motivates individuals, what is it that creates that sense of purpose and meaning. So alignment can then allow for that process. IBM would call it, I believe they were the first ones to use the phrase line of sight, and it meant that no matter where you were in the organization, you could look towards the vision and mission and say, yes, the work I'm doing is aligned with that. I see it. I have that line of sight. So that was a powerful phrase that they used. So again, I can't disagree with you about the importance of alignment, but it's such a leadership responsibility to create that environment, to know what does it take for us to get done here. There's two components to it. It's not only understanding what is the vision and mission, but how are we in my group going to get there? And so it's that process of knowing both the big picture and the day to day that can create the best alignment, I think, in an organization. Tremendous leadership responsibility, though.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure that like me, you've seen this go wrong. So talk to me a little bit about what happens when we don't have that line of sight. What happens when we don't have that alignment? Because you made a great point that it's that it's critical, right? Connecting where we're going and how we're going to get there with a leader. But what happens if employees don't understand that? What happens if leaders don't have alignment?
Well, I think several things. First of all, they don't have that sense of real purpose and meaning in the organization. Why am I here? What am I doing? What 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 value does my work have? A feeling of disconnection. Um, I think it's one of the leading components of people not just being dissatisfied but burning out. We talk about engagement. That's another E. Aligned people, aligned organizations tend to be organizations where there's greater levels of engagement as well. And so people can feel disconnected from their work. They can feel lack of choice, lack of having any sense of control over what they're doing, and just get into this spiral of why am I here, and that leads to all kinds of uh, negative feelings, negative views of the organization, burnout, people just and turnover and people saying, I'm out of here because this organization is not about us, getting that sense of meaning and seeing purpose in the work that we do and how we're achieving. It just seems like there's a group of people who make these decisions unilaterally and you either do it or get out and, that's it. So uh,
Hmm.
important, just like a car being out of a line. We know you're going to have some bald tires in a short while, and so you kind of where that metaphor comes into play, within the organizational structure as well. So I can't emphasize enough how key the leadership role is in that, though, both at the C level, but also in the day to day carrying out of that vision and mission. Leaders must create those environments. They must know both the big picture, the small picture, the data. And if they don't, these are the things that are going to happen. Less productive environments, lower bottom line, profit, uh, being less successful. And even in terms of creating value for them outside of the organization, what is the social responsibility of the organization? And for a lot of folks, they want to be able to say, if you work here, there's greater purpose than just the bottom line. Our group is contributing to the betterment of this community in which we live, and this, that, and the other. And so lots of conversation has taken place around that as well. So. That's a
Hmm.
lot, I know, but that's how I
No,
feel.
that's helpful. No, that's helpful, and I would agree with you. Now, I will tell you, if I rewind, I don't know, 20 years of my career, I worked for someone who made it clear that the whole purpose was that we should be happy that we worked where we did, and
Mhm.
never made that connection. And I will tell you that burned a lot of folks out. So is this only the I guess the younger folks, for lack of a better term, that have this, or is this? I mean, where did when did this become important, and is this kind of universally important? Is it every industry, every group that people want this, or is it just
Mhm.
I hate to use the word young people because neither you nor I are young people anymore, but that's kind of how I feel. Like I feel
Yeah.
like this is too super new. Like if I talk to my dad would be like, well, no, I don't need that. That's so talk to me a little bit about that, Jim.
Well, that's embedded. That's a great question, and I think it's embedded in, again, a broader issue of how people want to be led today, and how organizations need to be led in order to stay productive and successful and all this kind of stuff. There's a myriad of things we could talk about where organizations in the last 30 years have had to make changes. Some haven't. Some continue to, drag along in old models. And it's amazing to me that they still make money, but somehow they do. The sad part is you could do so much better and you could do the right thing. This is a principled matter as well as a pragmatic matter. You could create the right kind of environment to be even more productive. So I think younger folk are certainly expecting a certain kind of leadership that may be different than what our generation or the generation that preceded us may have come with in when they went into organizations. A lot of people expected, I come in, I'm told what to do, and that's what I do. I've got some amazing stories where organizations realized we have to change the way we do business, and they had to change the way their employees think about their work, and from being told what to do to actually being engaged and making decisions about it. And I know one instance where they had a 9-month program to train employees how to move into this new model, and it was very good. And it was well done. And yet they still had people at the end of that training period who said, I can't do that. That's not what I came into this business to do this, to be, tell me what I need to do. I do it and I go home. Those folks had to be managed out, as we say, of the organization because that wasn't going to work anymore. So your question, I think, follows again this trend, this notion that companies had to change structurally. They had to change culturally and strategically, and so alignment and some of these things become even more critical in terms of providing the kind of motivational environment. I say that leaders don't necessarily motivate. They can, but they also they create an environment in which employees can be self-motivated because intrinsic motivation is more powerful and longer lasting than just the extrinsic. We need certain extrinsic things to be in place, but once that's off the table, then what follows? So I think you could say, when did this start? I think it started when we had to start changing the way the global pressures, et cetera, the domestic pressures to change how we do work, and some have got it. Oh yeah, that's what we have to do. And if we're going to do it, it means these different things that we've been talking about. Some still don't, and they use management systems and processes and have attitudes that are reminiscent of scientific management, if you will, way back when when they were telling people you put that bolt in and the next one puts that, and that legacy still remains. So
Yeah. No, I think that's important, right? And I love that. That shows your subtitle, super important, right? Today's leaders, not yesterday's leaders, not the leaders
yeah,
of the past, right? But right now, today.
yeah.
And I think that's super important, right? If your organization is currently struggling and like, I don't know, I would tell you, go pick up a copy of the book, like put it in play and understand these. Jim's doing a great job of explaining. So far, we went through leadership and we went through alignment, which are two of the big ones. I'm going to jump out here to your other model, and then we'll jump back to the leaders model because I think it's important. But your SIC solutions here were super interesting to me. You talked about service, which we've talked about, and I might say, service and stewardship, which is the S in yours, very similar here. Inclusion and communication. I was not expecting you to talk about inclusion the way that you were, maybe because we're so focused on, diversity and inclusion that we ram them together as one word now. So
Right.
can you define inclusion for us and how we actually put that into practice, please, Jim?
Sure. I think there are variations of the term because inclusion can mean different things. Inclusion can mean diversity within the organization and within teams across a number of categories. And so we could talk about the importance of having that kind of diversity for a variety of reasons. Not just again, it's the right thing to do, but we also find that the diverse teams tend to be more productive, and inclusive groups tend to be more productive. But the way we also look at inclusion as involving people in the organization in a variety of things. I mentioned before the idea of autonomy. If we can provide certain levels of autonomy or choice within an organization, within a team, we use the word empowerment. We misuse the word empowerment, and we sometimes continue to do it because we think it means something, and it really doesn't happen. But that was the word of the word of the decade back in the '90s, empowerment. But that's really what you're talking about here in inclusion. When you include people in decision-making processes, for instance, and especially those who are going to be impacted by them, that has such a significant positive effect on the potential outcome of that decision. The decisions, major decisions, strategic decisions fail over and over again. The numbers are terrible, and from the framing of the issue to the implementation of the issue, there's problems all across that. But by including people in the conversation, by including people in transparent information, knowing what do I need to know to do my job effectively about how the organization is doing. And you and I know where there are organizations who can be transparent. And again, it doesn't mean everything is on the table, but a lot of the important things are on the table. Uh, that's a much more positive, less sort of people suspicious, less committed to the work of the organization than in organizations where there is that level of transparency that they feel like, okay, we have an idea of what's going on here. So that's inclusion. And our character Ben in the leadership carol was not inclusive at all. He was making unilateral decisions, every day, and it was demoralizing the organization. It was had a terrible impact on the production of the organization and things like that. So inclusive means engage. I don't want to use the word engage because that's the other but rather the idea of including, bringing people into the process. Don't you like to be included in transformational leadership? If you look at that model, one of the I's is individual consideration, and that's exactly what it's about. It's about engaging with people, involving people, and saying, "What do you think?" And not only that, but let's think outside the box. We need a solution. I can't do it all on my own as leader. I need your input. So even in that model, we see that sense of the leader wanting to bring people into the process. If you're not willing to do that, if it's no, man, I'm in charge. You got to do it my way or no way or get out of here. Okay. It's about me, baby. I got the title. It's on my door and not yours. So get out of here. You know, if we run into that kind of leader, we are not going to have an inclusive environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, we're also not going to have buy-in, right? Our teams are not going to perform at the highest level because they're like, well, hey, you're setting the direction here. And you know what? You didn't even ask my opinion. That doesn't mean that leaders have to bend to the will of their team, but it does mean they have to listen. And that's one of the things that you talk a lot about in the book, which I really like. And I could see that the L could have been, leadership is foundational. You could have made the L listening too, because
Sure.
that's so important with that. But let's talk about resilience
Well,
in your book.
Phil, let
Oh,
me
go
make
ahead.
a real quick
Go.
comment. That's why the SIC component, we thought was really important, because the capacity of communication, then we get a chance to talk about that. Just what you said. Communicating is about talking. It's often this. What did you say? Am I really hearing what you're saying? And why is that so critical? We saw the three components. I first called them vitamins. It's like the set of capacities that enable you even more to become the leader's model leader. And those so a service mind, service orientation, valuing inclusion, and understanding that you must communicate. How on earth are you going to establish uh, positive relationships with people, to influence them towards the achievement of a goal, and for you to be influenced by them in that achievement? It's a two-way street without knowing how to communicate. So that's where we get at some of those things too.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
absolutely. No, I think that is an excellent point, right? So service, inclusion, and communication, part of your 6 solutions, which I agree with. So let's pop over to resilience here. And you
Yes.
say in the book, I really like this. You said resilient people acknowledge the hurts and the emotional bruises. And that is so contrary to the leader is the strongest person in the room and never let him see you sweat, right? I mean, that's the when I grew up in leadership, right, 25 years ago, I was like, that was it, right? So tell me about that and how, I love the lesson that's in the book. So if you can talk more about resilience, that'd be great, Jim.
Sure. We hear so much about resilience. Again, it's another big top 10 word of of this era in terms of individual and organizational behavior, without a doubt. Um, and I should say that, and John has said this as well, that we wrote our books not just based on what we learned through the experience we had teaching leadership, training, etc., but our own experiences as well. And so some of those comments come from our own experience of being in that. Resilience is something that we look at as that word bouncing back. Uh, Being able to bounce back. I like to use the phrase bouncing forward, because you're equipped not just to deal with the circumstances that you currently are, but you are able to come out of that better equipped the next time you face a tremendous challenge, whether it's similar or totally different. And so it's during those periods where you're trying to deal with the challenge that you are going to get banged up and bruised potentially. It's happened. It's happened to me. It's happened to John. And the resilience then is the response to that. But you have to acknowledge, and you have to realize that that may happen. And so I'm going to have to deal with those feelings, and make sure that that's part of my process, sort of of healing and coming out of that challenge. Now saying, you know what, I'm better in terms of, with all humility, I'm better to face the next challenge because of what I just learned, what I was just through. Oh boy, and it's tough. And people write about various techniques of developing resilience, and those can be very helpful as well. But I think it starts with a realization that it's not just, oh well, hey man, I'm resilient now. That was easy. What's next? Come on, bring it, bring it. Uh, I don't think that's real. But again, how do leaders create a resilient environment, a resilient culture? They do that not just by modeling it themselves, but by helping others. Think of the way you need to support people as a leader when going through the challenges that you may be. You can't walk away and say, "Okay, see you in 6 months. Hope you make it." You have to be in there every day with them, again, as a servant leader, saying, how's it going? What do you need? Are you hanging in there? What's going on? Are you getting the help you need? Whatever it may be. So That's how I see
Yeah. Oh,
resilience today.
awesome. No, I agree with that. Right. Resilient. I would say resilient people are repetitive people. They continue to go, they continue to learn, they repeat and learn those lessons. And to your point, I love the idea of bouncing forward. I think that's a great reminder, right? Instead of bouncing back, why not bounce forward? Hopefully we make new mistakes instead of just making the same ones that we made in the past. So I think that's really, really strong, Jim. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that
Thank you.
so much, man. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So cool. So we've gone through so much of the models, your leader's model of leadership, ethics, alignment, decision making, engagement, resilience, and stewardship. We talked about your SIC solutions, service, inclusion, and communication, and bouncing forward with our resilience here. But Jim, if we want to get started on the journey, because we want to be a better leader today, like right now,
Yes.
where would people start? Obviously, get a copy of the book, right? Definitely
Yes.
start here so you can start seeing some of this stuff, right? Get the leader's model, but give me one or two steps that people can use to start their journey today.
Let me say one last comment about the leaders model. It is integrative in nature, and that means that these are behaviors that leaders do all the time. We don't just do one behavior one day. I'm going to be a decision maker today. I'm going to be a resilient leader. I'm going to do stewardship. This is a model in which leaders at any point in the day may engage in any of those letters, any of those concepts. So that's important because they draw upon one another. And so again, it's not like, okay, now I finished that one and that's over, but actually being a more ethical leader can help me in my decision making. Being a more resilient leader can help me in creating alignment within the organization and stuff like that. So that's important. So for me, it's about transformation. Transformative learning is where you start because you want to ultimately change behavior. If you look at our character Ben in our first book, he got to that point where he said, I got to change. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but our company's headed nowhere fast if I don't. But he said, but I can't do this on my own. I just can't snap my fingers. And so he said, he decided in the story to get a coach and work with that person over a period of months, and he began to make progress in some of these areas. So it's important to understand the transformative cycle, if you will. And for me, it starts with challenging our assumptions about leadership. What is an assumption? It's that sort of sometimes unconscious belief we have about something that we don't think about it all the time, but it affects how we behave and how we act about whatever. If we have certain assumptions about people, we tend to react that way to people. But if our assumption, like you said earlier, is leadership, that I'm the tough guy, I don't cry, I don't this, I don't that, leaders model is not what you're looking for. That it's going to challenge your assumptions. You should be looking for it because it's going to challenge those assumptions and say you need to change the fundamental beliefs that you have about leadership. Okay, all right. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work while you're doing that. At the same time, if you're really committed to it, you start practicing some of the behaviors that you may not even be internally committed to yet. I've seen this happen. I've seen folks who said, I'm trying it, I'm doing it. I may not believe in it, but I'm trying it, I'm trying it. And here's the reaction I'm getting. And boy, we just had some wonderful dialogue and discussion around that. Gradually, what happened? These became behaviors that, yes, okay, I want to commit to these. I'm changing my attitude and my assumptions about behavior. I'm looking at the feedback I'm getting from others around me gradually. And now that's how I lead. That's my default. So that's where you start. Start with under reflecting. This is a really reflective process. John and I believe in the idea of being a reflective practitioner, understanding what the heck is going on with you and with others. So you say, what do I believe about leadership? Is it where I want to be? Start practicing those behaviors if you want to change. Seek feedback. Put together a group. One person called it a huddle group. People that you can be feel confident around, that you can share things with, like when you go into a huddle and call the next play. Uh, can they give you honest feedback? Are you going to take it? Do they You're gonna have to say, "Look, folks, no holds barred. I'm not gonna hammer you if you tell me what's really going on here and how I'm doing." Because if they get a sense that you're not listening and "Oh, I think I'm doing pretty good at that." Why would you say no? Listen, listen. The C. You continue to practice. You continue to deal with those assumptions. You continue to get the feedback. It's a cyclical process. And over a period of time, you may, hey, that's how I think about leadership now. I'm not even thinking about how I think about it. I changed. It's not easy. It doesn't happen. The journey itself is part of the process of change in that sense because what you're going through. I know it sounds like some 30,000 foot. Are you kidding me? But let me tell you something. I have seen this happen in countless hundreds of people who, when they began, this experience, th- servant leadership. What? Are you kidding me? That's crazy. And gradually they come and say, that's who I am now. Something changed in me. It happens. It didn't happen because they took a test. It didn't happen because they wrote an essay. It happened because they got in there and they started practicing. They started getting feedback and they finally said, you know what? That's who I am. I wasn't that way when I came in, but I am now.
Awesome. Awesome. Great place to start and a great place to end. Getting started on looking inside and examining your assumptions, listening and asking for and accepting feedback non defensively. Great, great stuff, Jim. Super appreciate it. So, folks, if you're listening, you're like, wow, I want more of Jim Dittmar. Heck yeah. So, go get a copy of the Leadership Carol or the Leader's Model. They're both on Amazon. Go check them out and learn more from Jim. I so appreciate you, my friend. Great
Thank you,
stuff
Phil.
today. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jim.
Phil.